Admitting now.
Good morning, everyone. We'll just give it a moment for everyone to enter the meeting, and then we'll get started. I'll just give it another few seconds here to let anyone else coming in who's going to join us today, and then we'll begin. Okay, it looks like we've slowed down there. So hello everyone, and welcome to the CCUS Webinar Series. This is the third in the series, and today we're talking about communicating with communities about CCUS. My name is Tamara Gale, and I'm the Senior Marketing and Communications Manager at Carbon Management Canada. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. We are situated on land northwest of where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, a site traditionally known as Mohkinstsis to the Blackfoot, Wincheespaw to the Stoney Nakoda, and Gutitsti to the Tsuut'ina. Today on this land and in this place, we strive to learn and grow together in a good way. So thanks again for joining us. In today's webinar, we'll begin with an introduction of our speaker panel, followed by a few quick questions, a little survey for our webinar participants. We'll hear from each of our speakers and provide you a chance to ask your questions before we close the webinar with a final survey. I'm pleased to have with us three communicators in working in CCUS today, and they'll be presenting to us on this topic and sharing their experiences. First, I'd like to introduce Norm Sakuda. Norm has been Director of Communications at the Petroleum Technology Research Centre in Regina since 2008, overseeing projects like the Weyburn-Midale CO2 monitoring and Aquastore CO2 storage. He holds a master's in English from the University of Alberta and an MFA in creative writing from UBC. He's an accomplished writer, and his work has appeared in various publications, and his poetry collection, Garments of the Known, was published by Nightwood Editions. I'd also like to introduce Kyle Glazewski, Assistant Director at the EERC, that's the Energy and Environmental Research Center in the United States. Kyle oversees outreach, workforce development, and stakeholder engagement for sustainable energy and carbon reduction. He holds an MS and BS degree in geography from UND and specializes in CCS monitoring, site characterization, wellbore evaluation, and geospatial analysis. And third, I'd like to introduce Jillian Hines. Jillian is Director of People and Community at Enhance Energy. She leads HR, Indigenous engagement, and community investment for the organization, blending CCUS with social equity. She holds an MBA from Queen's, a CPHR designation, and serves on boards like the Calgary Public Library and Ask Her YYC. A fellow with the Energy Futures Lab and mentor with Flora's Rise on boards, she has earned awards for her social impact in energy. Jillian is also a proud mother of 2 and spouse to a Calgary firefighter. So thanks to the 3 of you for joining us today. We're certainly interested to hear about your perspectives and experiences working with communities in Canada, in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and the US. And I'll ask Norm to actually, before I ask Norm to start, we'll just pop up our survey questions for all our participants today. We'd certainly appreciate if you take a moment to answer these questions and provide your feedback to us, so we can continue to improve our events for you. I'll ask Helen just to start the survey. So we start with just 3 questions for you today, not too difficult, hopefully. We're wondering how familiar you are with the carbon capture, utilization, and storage industry. And there's a range of answers there for you, from very familiar to not familiar at all. So please do make a choice somewhere on that scale. I'll just give you a second.
Did you want the speakers to do this as well?
No, that's okay, Norm.
Okay, I was just wondering.
We'd like to know, how interested are you in learning about the CCUS sector? Anywhere from not at all interested to very interested. So please make a selection along that scale as well for the second question. And the last one, which of the following best describes your current involvement with the energy or CCUS sector? And select all that apply. So you work in the energy sector, or you're a student or researcher in energy related fields, or you live in Canada and would like to learn more about CCUS, or you live outside of Canada and would like to learn more about CCUS. I'll just give one more second for everyone to submit. Just click the submit button at the bottom of the text box, and we'll have your answers recorded. Thank you so much for your participation. Norm, I'll ask you to start sharing your screen and we'll get started.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so I only have, I think, about 7 or 8 slides. They're going to be very quick, and I thought I'd do a focus that's more on what's happening in the media landscape. Some of these I did present earlier this year at the Greenhouse Gas Technologies Conference. Others, I'm going to speak to them a bit differently than I did there. But I'm going to talk about our connection to media as CCS project proponents and CCS project planners, and what's happening in the current media landscape, because I think it is a source of concern. And it really is something that does affect not just how people receive information, but how their opinions are shaped. And I think this cuts across other disciplines, not just CCS, but it does in particular affect CCS. So this is just 2 articles that I found randomly, and you can see they're relatively recent, in November. Good press for CCS projects, or is it good press? And what I want to point out about these articles is I'm fairly certain that these were simply press releases that were sent to local media outlets and were printed word for word, because I can tell you that in the last 2 years, when I send press releases, whether it's about CCS projects or word about our projects, or whether it's about some other aspect of the research we do, because we do geothermal work and other things, I'm finding more and more that small newspapers and small media outlets simply print my press release as an article. Now that carries with it all kinds of repercussions, because it's really not journalism. I don't get many phone calls about the press release trying to do an article that might ask me a few questions about why do we need CCS, why do we need geothermal. That just isn't happening, because these local outlets, and even to the level of bigger cities like Regina and Saskatoon, have had their journalists gutted. They basically have very few people working there. They're centralized in terms of them if they're part of a chain. It's very difficult to actually get media in a meaningful way interested in your project. Now that's fine if I just want them to mouth what it is that I'm saying. But for informing the general public, they need to be able to ask questions and to be able to read an article by a journalist that is actually asking good questions, and that just isn't happening at the moment with most of the events that I've had. And I've had 4 press events in my lobby dealing with different projects, and I can't tell you the number of times that the press release I sent out has been published as an article. So that's just the first thing I want to point out about the scape for communications about CCS projects. Now this addresses to some extent what I'm talking about, which is the siloing of audiences, because you have media outlets being created that are very specific in their political perspective, that have very specific political ideas about what it is that they, what opinions they have about CCS or other topics. And you end up with people just reading over and over and over again the same thing. I remember reading recently that, you know, the premier of Alberta started to parrot some of the ideas about chemtrails and how those are affecting climate and things like that. And that shows on the part of even certain political leaders that they're reading siloed news as well. And I think that that can be an issue. Now, these particular examples were from accusations of a leak at the Weyburn CO2 storage facility at a field operation that was near a farm and a family that claimed that CO2 was leaking. PTRC had been involved for over 10 years with doing research at that site and monitoring based on baselines and other methods that you use for CO2 leakage, and had never found evidence of that. This was the actual journalism that happened after we released our results within the first week, and then again later that year, showing that a leak hadn't happened. And there were only 3 newspapers that still had journalists writing from a scientific perspective. One was the Globe and Mail, one was the New York Times, and the other one was Scientific American, which of course does articles about science all the time. Now that speaks to problems if you're trying to get accusations against your project which require technical answers or scientific answers into the mainstream media. And you know, it's great that we had these articles that were published that really did discount that there was a leak happening at the site, but I can go to Europe and still find people involved with CCS projects there indicating that the Weyburn project leaked, because this, unless you follow these kinds of media outlets, you're not going to get word. You know, the accusation got all kinds of coverage, the actual science afterwards did not. So this is one of the obstacles that we face as purveyors of any kind of scientific project, is that there seems to be a lot of attention paid to accusations and very little paid to the science later when you're trying to prove something. So anyway, I know it's a bit of a different perspective I'm taking right now, because of course we're really talking about outreach and communications, but this is part of the landscape that we're living in now, and it does pose problems for projects. So the Sartaria pipeline failure, which happened during the pandemic down in the United States, it was a CO2 pipeline that failed. The CO2 rolled down a hill. It was a catastrophic failure because of a washout from like 13 centimeters of rain that occurred or something like that. The CO2 rolled down the hill and did sicken people in the town. No one was killed, but the problem was identified as in communications, that this was an old pipeline that was 25 years old that had been transporting CO2 for a number of years, and the local community at Sartaria and the emergency responders had no idea that the pipeline was there. So the principal 180-page report that came from the U.S. Department of Transport arising from that incident was that this was a catastrophic failure of communications, that had the local community known the pipeline was there, had emergency responders gotten the training, which they have in our projects, in Estevan and other areas, about what to do if there were a leak, this would not have been seen as a major incident. But it's interesting that this, as a failure of communications, is a big problem that has caused problems for many, many projects since. I think maybe EERC will speak to this. You know, now there's fear of CO2 pipelines even in North Dakota. You know, this lack of communications between project planners and the local communities is very critical. Now these headlines, you know, these are certain, again, the siloing of news. You have National Observer. These are all publications that are totally against CCS. And as a result, we get zombie pipelines. That's becoming a big phrase that's being used in opposition to CO2 pipelines at the moment, which, you know, is itself not necessarily good journalism, but it's effective if you're trying to cause these projects to end. So this was if you're looking for a good news source about CCS that is also climate-based and that is fundamentally probably opposed to CCS, but that does good journalism, I felt this article raised a very good question about communications within projects and between the regulator, in this case the EPA, and the local community. It's really important that you figure out who is it who's responsible for relating leakage information, if there is leakage happening, to the general population in and around your project. And I think this was a very good article that pinpointed the kind of failures in communication between the regulator and the project proponent. So I'm going to click quickly through these. ChatGPT is another challenge for us because a lot of the information that ChatGPT accesses will be inaccurate. You know, this was one example. CO2 injection wells, also known as carbon capture and storage, involve injecting carbon dioxide that the wells themselves do it. We pointed out that it's not the wells, that it's the container, the formation itself that are designed to store the carbon dioxide. And their response was, ChatGPT was very, very nice to us. It said, "You are correct, and I apologize any confusion caused." But what this points to, and I just want to go quickly through these images that ChatGPT creates as well, is that it really is a difficult platform, but one that people access for accurately portraying CCS. These are when we said, what is a CO2 storage location? These came up in ChatGPT. Okay, the first ones were very complicated. The second ones just simply don't exist. And this is an example that we have that we use at open houses that's to scale, that shows how a CO2 storage project works with aquifers and aquitard separated out and to scale. So that's really kind of all I wanted to say, that the kind of challenges we're facing, I'm going to stop sharing now, that we're facing with CCS is that we have a media landscape that is increasingly fractionated and siloed, and media outlets that are unable to actively, effectively describe projects or describe problems when they arise. And I think that is a major obstacle for CCS right now.
Thanks, Norm. That was certainly a great intro and discussion into media and how that influences the public perception. And of course, I'm sure Kyle and Jillian have also experienced this, where in doing outreach, that is media has great power to influence and provide information, whether it be accurate or not, and really can affect people's perceptions. So that was good insight there. Thank you. I'll just remind everyone that we will be taking questions at the end of the session. So please do type any of your questions into the Q&A or the chat. We'll be sure to make sure that your questions get to Jillian, Kyle, and Norm for today. So I'll ask Kyle to start sharing his screen and begin his presentation. Thanks, Kyle.
All right, thank you, Tamara. Are you able to see my screen too? All right, perfect. So thank you, everybody. Pleasure to be here today. Excited to speak to you all. So I'm going to provide my view of from North Dakota as we talk about CCUS. So ERC, we've been involved in carbon capture and storage for 20 plus years now. We lead the PCOR partnership, which is the Plains CO2 Reduction Partnership. We've been doing that since 2003, and it's really been fascinating as you talk about outreach and engagement, looking at it over that lifetime. So early on, before projects were realized, it was very much, oh, you go out and you do outreach. So you go talk to communities and inform them, and everybody's like, yeah, that's great. And now it's a little more intense now, right? You're bringing projects on the ground. So it makes a little bit of a different ballgame now. So I'm looking now to kind of walk you guys through what is actually happening in Western North Dakota, which is where our storage is located. So as we look at North Dakota, you can see a map here on the right showing some of our subsurface activities. So we have a lot of oil and gas development. We have the Bakken oil play, which is driving a lot of our revenue in the state, a lot of oil development, but it's also contributed to our knowledge of the subsurface. So we understand the subsurface very well in the western part of the state. There's over 40,000 wells that have been drilled over the past several decades. And so with that information, it's really provided a basis to understanding the subsurface where we are looking to implement carbon capture and storage. So right now, as we look at the landscape today, we have 3 projects that are operating. So you can see the green stars there. You have a couple of ethanol facilities, the Red Trail Energy ethanol plant. So they're storing about 180,000 tons per year. That plant has been operational, actively injecting since June of 2022. You have the Blue Flint ethanol facility near Underwood. They inject about 200,000 tons per year. And finally, the Dakota Gasification Company, their Great Plains Synfuels plant. They are now injecting, just for storage, about 1.5 million tons per year. And on top of that, we also have some enhanced oil recovery projects that have been going on. So again, the Dakota Gasification Company, you can see there's a CO2 pipeline there that's been operating for a couple decades now, moving CO2 up to the Weyburn oil fields that Norm just mentioned a few minutes ago here. That's been injecting, I don't even know the volumes there, but plenty of CO2 for their operations. And then Denbury, you see in the southwest part of the state, has also been injecting CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. So, I group in the enhanced oil recovery projects with CO2 storage because ultimately over the life of those EOR projects, that CO2 is staying in the reservoir. Over 95% of the CO2 that you purchase for an EOR project is staying in the subsurface. So that's why, on our end, we're classifying them as also a storage project. Just a little background there. We also have a couple of storage facility permit sites. So these are Class 6, EPA Class 6 standard wells and projects that will be coming online. So you see the DCC West and East. So that is tied to the Milton R. Young Power Station. That's a Minn Kota owned power station. And so they're looking at injecting about 4 million tons per year at their two facilities there. And then we have other projects that are looking to develop. You see a couple of them highlighted there. Rainbow Energy is the Coal Creek Power Station that's looking at 9 million tons. And then Summit is one that you will see in the news plenty in our area. And that's looking at capturing CO2 from ethanol facilities across the Midwestern. When I say Midwest US, I'm talking Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, South Dakota, bringing that CO2 via a large pipeline over to Western North Dakota. So that's a quick overview of what we're looking at in our state. So when I think about the project activities, those that have been successful and less successful, I really start to get some themes in my head as I look at these. So the successful projects, they're doing a very good job of understanding their audience. They know their audience well. They know what's important to them, what industries they're working in, how they're managing their landscape, and they know if those populations have been, what they've been through. So have they had bad experiences with different industries or partners? And so that, having that relationship and understanding them has been very important. And the successful projects, so I'm thinking like Minn Kota or Red Trail, Red Trail Ethanol especially, I'll highlight them in a minute here, but they're very much connected to their communities. So they're invested, they have relationships, the employees are having relationships with the public, and it allows you to build that trust, and they can go ahead and they can have conversations, and they have these open lines of communication where, when questions arise or people, they may see something on there and they have a question, they know the people that are there that are actively working on the project, and they can go to them with questions. Or if they see something out on the landscape, like, hey, why are you doing this? Or why is somebody coming and looking at the well now? They have those open lines, and that's very important, having that trust within your project area with that local community. Also, people in those local communities, they understand the importance of the facility. These successful projects, they understand, like a Minn Kota, the reason that there's local support there for that Minn Kota project is that people are very much tied to that facility. They understand the importance of the power plant, the Milton R. Young power plant, and how that brings jobs and it supports that local economy. Even the coal mine that supports that power plant, people understand that, and seeing the value of being able to extend the life of that facility by incorporating carbon capture and storage, people can get on board with that if they see that those jobs aren't going to go away, or it's going to increase their tax revenue in their county, or it's going to add new jobs, whatever the case may be. Where we're seeing acceptance, it's very much tied to having that that stake in the game for the community, understanding that, hey, that facility is part of our community, and we don't want that to go away, or we don't want that to fail. So having that support has been very important. And then also, as you're engaging with these communities and you're going out and you're having events, addressing their questions honestly. There's nothing really to hide behind with carbon capture and storage. We understand the technical the technical side of it, how the CO2 is captured, how it is transported, how it is stored. The science is there. We've been handling CO2 as a fluid, injecting it into the subsurface since the 1970s. Now, albeit that was all for enhanced oil recovery, but like I said earlier, that is also storing the CO2. So that has increased our knowledge over these decades, where we understand what is going to happen when we inject CO2 into the subsurface. So having that basis, having that background, and just being open with those communities and communicating it very directly with them. When you're standing there at different community events, having materials hands-on where we can show them like, hey, this is how it works. This is what will be coming online to your community. These are all things that happened and took place in those neighborhoods where projects were coming online successfully. So to highlight one of the projects in particular, I want to highlight the Red Trail Energy project. So this one, they had early and regular engagement, different events. They had open house events, and we brought these communities in, and people came and they asked plenty of questions. We talked them through what to expect, how the project was going to evolve, and what they could expect to see. And you know, they've been injecting for these past couple of years. The community is, you know, generally supportive of it. And when you know, about a year ago, we asked their CEO at the time, we said, hey, what was the most important thing to making this a successful project? And he just flat out said, it was doing the outreach. I didn't want to do it at first, but it was very important to have that local buy-in, helping the community understand what is going to take place. And that helped them have a successful project. So a couple more slides here. So on the flip side, as you look at the projects that aren't doing as well or have had bigger hurdles to overcome, you can basically flip those positives into negatives. So poor communication, not addressing questions or concerns, not having those ties to the community. So, you know, one of the projects that I showed on the map, that Summit Carbon Solutions, you know, they've had a bit of an uphill battle. I think they've done a pretty good job at trying to engage the local communities, but you know, they're coming in from Iowa, they're out of state, and they had some challenges early on. But as they, you know, engaged more with the locals, as they actually had local people working on their project who were, again, had ties to those communities, that's when you started to see some better acceptance, some more support. And, you know, again, it's very important that you're establishing those relationships. That's, you know, paramount. And some of these projects are doing better than others. There's other projects that are hoping to come online that I didn't show you on the map there, but you know, every project is unique. Everybody has their challenges that they need to overcome, and sometimes those events are outside of your control. Norm highlighted it very well. I actually thought about covering those couple events there too, where you know, you have these pipeline leaks that have been in the news. You have, you know, this ADM one most recently, and what you need to do is, you know, you don't hide from it. You very much straightforward, you address it, and you inform your community. Even our successful projects, so Red Trail Energy, they called me very soon after they heard about the ADM leak, like, hey, help me understand what happened. How is it different from my project? And they're communicating that actively to their community to address that. You don't, you know, again, they don't need to hide anything. There are very different elements of that ADM project versus what Red Trail is doing, and highlighting that, helping the community understand. And they haven't really had much pushback. They've informed their landowners, and people, you know, they've trusted them. Their operation has been going on, and things have been looking good. So just final thoughts, again, just hammering home this point, you know, local engagement, doing it early and often, you know, having a team approach where you bring in the right experts that understand the different technologies and components of your CCS operation. And then having that community buy-in, and I didn't touch on this, but having community advisory boards where you have people that, you know, are interested in your project. They may oppose it, they may be all in favor of it, but putting together a board where you get community input into your project as you're going through the planning stages is also a nice approach to where you're getting that community buy-in. They're actually part of the project, helping point out questions or concerns early on. And then finally, be ready for anything. You never know what events might pop up, like the incidents we just talked about, and you never know what questions people might have. So, I've stood at some of these local events, and you're asking questions from landowners. You just don't know what they're going to ask you. So, you got to be ready for it, but you also be open and honest. And if you don't know, you don't know. The landowners don't want to have you lying to them, giving them a bunch of BS. You tell them straight up, I don't know, but I will find the answer for you and follow up and make sure you follow through on that. So I think I'm plenty over my time here, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thanks, Kyle. I think those were some good examples of when engagement is working and when it's not. And you're right, it does point to a pretty clear pretty clear trend, some clear guidelines there about what works and what doesn't. And we talk a lot too about engaging early and often, just because that's a really effective way to help people understand your project. So thanks for sharing. And again, just one more reminder, if you have questions for our speakers today, please type those into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be sure to ask them after Jillian's presentation. So at this point, I'll ask Jillian to share her screen and pass the meeting over to you, Jillian.
Fantastic. And Norm and Kyle, thank you so much. You've really set, I think, this up nicely. And Norm, thank you for ChatGPT. We need to see more of it and what's wrong with it and what's good about it. So I really appreciate that. So today I'm actually going to share more from an industry perspective, approaches to community engagement that we've taken at Enhance Energy. And so my role is Director of People and Community, and I lead internally the sort of people culture function, and externally community engagement, investment, and the Indigenous engagement functions as well. So quite diverse and broad from a work perspective. And so I'm with Enhance Energy. We are carbon management is honestly, it's our business. We have over 15-year company history, and we're a founding partner in the Alberta Carbon Trunkline project. So that's one of the world's largest carbon capture and storage projects. We have both EOR, recovery and project development in the works right now for carbon capture and storage. So we have both the CCS and the CCUS. And we're an operator of about 25% of Canada's CCUS capacity. And to date, we have over 5 million tons of CO2 sequestered. So as you can imagine, a lot of experience and expertise in the organization. And often the challenge is, how do we translate that when we go into community in ways that meets the community needs and meets where the audience is at? And so that's the sort of fun work I get to do when I go into communities. And so just to talk a bit about our approaches, and then I'll share a few sort of case studies and lessons learned. For us, community engagement isn't just a check the box activity or something that we only do when we have a legal requirement to do so. And yes, in Alberta, we have duty to consult. We have, regulatory directives coming from the AER that outline participant requirements. But we really focus on that more proactive approach to community engagement and being in the communities, investing in the communities, showing up in the communities, and talking to communities before we have any type of legal or regulatory requirement to do so. So just a couple pictures here. You'll see top left, bottom right. I'll talk about roadshows later, but we went on a series of roadshows throughout central Alberta. So we operate in a few different locations. Our biggest plant is in Clive, so sort of between Calgary and Red Deer area, and there's a bunch of communities throughout that we focus on, along with Indigenous nations, the Masquachese nations in central Alberta. And so we've done road shows. Those are the pictures in the corners, but we sponsor golf tournaments. So that's the Masquachese golf tournament in where our Candace Patton, our VP of Corporate Affairs, is waving from the tent, and you'll see a playground picture. So we also do playground builds. It's not just donating money. We actually show up and build alongside community. And everything that we do, we try to educate and talk and share knowledge about CCUS and about the work that we do in Enhance. And so it's really about those positive, sustained relationships, which make such a positive impact on our project development and our daily operations. And so for us, engagement is really holistic. It starts with our purpose and values. So you'll see our 4 core values at the top there. And yes, it can be a challenging environment right now to talk to people about CCUS. And there is some recent opposition, but we embrace those challenges and we actually see it as an opportunity, again, to meet folks where they're at, to maybe break some paradigms in how we engage with communities. And we really focus on that rural community, youth in STEM and reconciliation focus as well in the work that we do. We don't just wait, we show up, we're present, we go to municipal councils, we host road shows, we talk to our landowners quite frequently. We hand deliver invitations to the ones that we know, really would appreciate that high touch approach. And we're accountable. If we say we'll do something and if we make a commitment to a community member, we track it, we follow up, we make sure if there's a theme to identify that and to bring it back to the community in some way. And so our purpose is really on the community engagement side to make the positive impact in the communities and the areas that we're working. And we really bring together our community engagement, our Indigenous engagement with the Masquechese Nations, and also partnering with organizations through sponsorships and donations in all of those communities. So you might see our logo on the hockey board, it might show up at the Cadets Parade. And again, it's in the playgrounds and all of these things that we're trying to do. So it's not just when we have something to approve or when we have an issue that we're out there. And we follow 5 sort of guiding principles in our engagements. I talked a lot about beyond regulations, right? Regulations are bare necessity for public engagement. We go beyond in that sort of, Kyle said it nicely, engage early, engage often, and don't just wait until there's a reason why you have to be there. We also make sure we have very clear and measurable goals and objectives. So are you seeking feedback for a new project? Is it a consultation requirement? Do you want to foster stronger relationships? Is it about gathering feedback? Is it understanding certain community concerns, right? What are those objectives when you go into community? And I'll show you a bit about knowledge sharing, but again, for us, there's a lot of technical knowledge. There's decades of sort of evidence behind the work we do, but we have to be able to translate it in a way where different audiences understand. They may never believe it, but at least where we can give them a chance to ask questions and to listen and sort of demonstrate curiosity in empathetic ways. And so we bring technical learning in really accessible ways through tactile exhibits like core samples, through posters, through different sort of myth-busting questions, scientific experiments that folks can understand. And we always have a local focus. And so this is really about working with municipal administration, understanding the communities, what are their concerns, how do they, even down to what's the right time, right? In Central Alberta, there's a lot of harvest season. You're not going to show up in community during harvest. There's not going to be people there, right? Or Indigenous nations go on powwows in the summer in Alberta, and there's powwow trails. You're not going to show up in the nation during that time because you won't be meeting with community. And so really getting to know that community, we go into municipal councils, and our belief is if we can communicate and share with community leaders, they can also help to bridge that gap in communications with members when we can't always be in community. And so that local focus really matters in tailoring your event or your roadshow to that community. And importantly is that listening loop, right? We listen, but we also listen to follow up. And that we give folks ways to share their questions in ways that's most suited to them, right? One-on-one discussions. We bring our CEO, we bring our MMV specialist, we have our safety folks, we have our ops, folks out. We have comment cards, we have a dedicated community email. So, you can call the land manager on his cell phone. So whatever ways work best for folks, we make sure that we're giving that opportunity to communicate in the ways that best suit each member. And so I'll share a little bit about something that we've done just recently. So we went on a series of roadshows throughout Central Alberta to these different rural municipalities and rural communities. And it really was intended to foster sort of clear communication about what we believe and what we know the benefits of CCUS is, to share more about the work we do at Enhance Energy. So if you see our logo or you see somebody with Enhance on their coveralls in the community, you know who we are and what we're doing. But importantly, we wanted to listen to the concerns or understand the concerns of community members. And they're out there. It's safety, it's groundwater, it's agriculture, it's quality of, air quality. There's these concerns are out there. And so we want to sort of understand, and if they're willing to hear our perspective and our viewpoints on what we think the solutions are or what we would provide as an answer to those concerns. And just before we embarked on this roadshow, the first community we went to had a lot of vocal opposition about another CCS organization that had made a pretty substantial business announcement. And so there was a series of community members who showed up at municipal council at open mic and had a lot to say about the CCUS project. And so we could have not went out to community, but that wasn't the right answer for us. And so we called the administration and we worked on an approach that would best suit that community. And we also prepped our team on how to respond if there was negative or strong emotion or vocal opposition about CCUS and the work that we do. And so that sort of proactive foresight is what really made that successful. And we had really good conversations with the folks that showed up in that particular roadshow, which carried on with us throughout the rest of the communities. And so that's that importance of understanding that local perspective. And then just to share a few things that we bring to our different roadshows. So we work on invites that go out to municipalities that are specific to what we're looking for. We have invitations that are custom designed, times that, again, that work for the community. Is it afternoon? Is it evening? Is it morning? If you have a lot of seniors or more elderly folks in a community, the time might be different than somebody that has a young community with young children and parents, right? So considering your community needs, offering ways to comment anonymously if they choose. And then Norm, this is our visual, one of our visuals we bring, but showing folks, right? If groundwater is a concern, let us show you the subsurface. Let's show you the layers. Let's talk about MVV and MMV and testing. Let's show you that depth difference. And that may help to alleviate some of that. And so that's where understanding your community really matters and where they show up. And so I'll end with just lessons learned. You'll see here, there are misperceptions and there are different beliefs about CCUS out there. And that really requires navigating distrust. And honestly, you can provide all the facts in the world, but that doesn't always change people's minds or beliefs. And so for me, it really is empathetic listening and saying, I hear you're frustrated. I hear you're concerned. Tell me where that's coming from. And can I share what we do in response to that concern? Sometimes they're open and sometimes they don't want to hear what we do, but that's okay. And what's really important, and one of the sort of lessons that I've learned, is when you demonstrate good corporate stewardship, it creates community champions. So because we spend a lot of time out in communities, we, at these roadshows in particular, we've had deputy mayors or Reeve respond to a community member who was upset and vocal about CCUS. And that person went over and said, you know what, Enhance is doing really good things in the community. Here's what I've seen them do. Can I share what they've shared with me? So we don't even have to address it. It's being addressed. Or landowners to each other where there's a concern and somebody says, you know what, I talked to my neighbor, the concern that I raised yesterday, actually, I'm not concerned about it anymore because they've told me this is what you do. Right. And so that good stewardship goes such a long way. It's like your net promoter score. And so we really focus on, again, that early and proactive engagement to build that stewardship and really have that credibility and trust in who we are as an organization. And so, engagement for us is not a checkbox. It's functional. It's critical to CCUS success. We know that collaboration, it's the path forward, especially with the public and industry. And this is the messages that we want to share with community, the benefits that CCUS creates in terms of job creation, industry sustainability, reducing carbon footprint, supporting energy transition in different ways, and really has that benefit and impact on the community that we believe is positive and long-term. And so those are some of our lessons and some of the things that we have seen just recently. And so welcome comments or questions. And thank you, Kyle and Norm, for setting us up in a good way as well.
Thanks, Jillian. It really does go to show that, it's important to have such a balanced approach. Really what we're here for is to see CCUS projects, move through stages of approval and through a final investment decision so that they can become a reality and become commercial projects that can supply these benefits such as jobs, particularly here in Alberta. So thank you for sharing those thoughts and tips and insight into how effective discussion can really help the industry move forward. We do have some questions coming in through the chat, so I'm just going to share my screen one more time here, and so we can get to our discussion. And I'll just skip ahead to our place here. So I'll start with some of the questions in our chat here. We have a question actually fairly specifically about a technology we spoke about earlier. Measurement, monitoring, and verification, or MMV, can be improved to manage subsurface dynamics, perform CO2 plume steering, and improve dissolution and residual trapping. Also for pipes, monitoring systems such as thermography and infrared can be used to check the CO2 pipe characteristics and provide pre-alarms before leakage happens. So this is more of a statement, but what I'll do is ask maybe Jillian and then maybe Kyle and Norm just to quickly touch on how these effective techniques of ensuring that we are measuring, monitoring, and verifying our CO2 both in pipelines and when we store it underground, how that can provide assurance to communities about our projects. Jillian.
Yeah, it's a great comment. Thank you for clarifying MMV for folks who may not know that acronym. It's easy to throw out an acronym. For us, especially when I go into community, I'm not a technical expert. And so for me, I would say, surface understanding. I know a little bit about a lot of things as it relates to CCUS, but that depth itself is not my background, nor is it my role, which is really interesting. And so it actually, for me, means that I can go into community and talk about this in an accessible way. And with MMV, for us, it really is in that safety side. People want to know, right? CO2 sequestration, that their subsurface is safe. And that's where we talk about that measurement monitoring through each of those layers and sort of taking that thumbprint and understanding when we measure what's going on, whether it's groundwater, subsurface levels, et cetera. And being able to talk about that from that safety, security perspective, which is what I find that most community members are concerned about. And so again, for me, it's taking something that there is science and technical expertise behind it and making that very accessible to community members and talking about MMV plans, what's happening in terms of government regulation requirement from an MMV perspective and any type of technical expertise itself. So that's where I focus on the MMV side, but welcome Norm or Kyle for other perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Norm, your presentation really touched on this. A lot of the news in the media kind of can create fear around this topic.
I guess the problem with communicating the science of MMV to audiences that are not often not that interested in the science aspect of it, but are interested in assuring the safety of their communities, is that, you know, the best thing to do, particularly in a local community where a project is happening, is to actually have tours of your facility and actually show what MMB is in place. And we've done that continuously since Aquastor was put in place in the Estevan area. I can't tell you the number of tours, both international, people interested on an international basis what we're doing, but in the from the local community to show the kind of measurement and monitoring that's happening. Now, a lot of the MMB that is at surface, and that is to say groundwater monitoring, soil gas monitoring, you know, there's a certain amount of CO2 in the soil, which if you've used baselines, you can tell if there's a leak because those samples would show that there was a leak. That kind of surface monitoring in many ways is done only for public assurance. If in the operating of a CCS storage facility, you don't witness or see a leak much further down in the reservoir before it ever reaches surface, then there's something wrong with your MMB. So that's something I also try to explain to people who come to tours, that, you know, we do this surface monitoring because we want to make sure that you're confident that everything's staying where it should. But if we see a leak happening, if one happens, it's going to be way down the wellbore, way down in the formation, which we can then address way before it gets to the surface. And if you're not doing your MMB properly, that's the only way that you would have something at surface. And as a matter of fact, the ADM leak that was talked about earlier, one of the observation wells determined that there was migration in the formation from 7,000 feet to 5,500, and it was stopped at that point. So you know, any kind of leakage that you might get will be deeper in the reservoir. So long way of explaining that MMB is there for public assurance, but the best MMB is looking at the CO2 way deep in the reservoir to make sure that it never gets anywhere near the surface. That's basically.
Thanks, Norm. Kyle.
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting comment. So this person who left the comment seems to be diving into some of the science and the details of it. So that's what I'm seeing when I look at this. And so what I think of with our monitoring program, you know, yes, we have the public side that you guys just talked about, but there's also the side that we work with the regulatory folks. So I work on the Red Trail Energy project. We help give them advice and help them with monitoring their systems or whatever and doing their quarterly reporting to the state of North Dakota. And so we have conversations with our state regulators who are also geologists and engineers, and they understand the mechanics too. So the monitoring program provides them reassurance that this storage facility is being operated properly, that it's being operated safely. And so the monitoring data, operational data, even when you're looking at pressures and temperatures and wellbores, and you get into all this engineering jargon, you know, it's very important for those of us who are managing the project to make sure that, yeah, everything's operating as we're expecting it to. If there are variations, why? And we can investigate them very early before they become a problem. And so when we look at our monitoring data, when we get out to a 5-year point, we're supposed to reevaluate our entire project and say, okay, is the CO2 performing as we expect? If not, let's relook at it and see, is the CO2 plume in the subsurface where we expect it to, and we remodel if things are different. So the monitoring program is, you know, important on the technical side too. And like they say in their comment too, you know, monitoring the piping system. So part of the monitoring program for these projects in North Dakota, you need to look at corrosion coupons for your infrastructure, so your pipelines, and, you know, making sure that you're not getting degradation in your system. You're also checking the CO2 stream flow characteristics, understanding the chemistry of that CO2. Is there anything that's changing that could be cause for concern? So yeah, all that monitoring program, there's the public facing side, but there's a very technical side that gives us reassurance as a project operator, and also the regulators that they are confident that, yep, these people are doing what they're supposed to.
Thanks, Kyle. We have a question here. How much effort should be used to dispel misinformation, and citing a reference to the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis as an example. You know, certainly something I think we've touched on today. Norm certainly started with it. So Norm, I'll go to you. How much effort should we be putting into dispelling misinformation? Oh, you're just on mute, Norm.
Just saw that. Yeah, I think for something like the new AI that's happening everywhere with these different AI programs is contingent on project proponents and people who are supportive of projects, I think, to ask some questions on these platforms and then help feed new information into them. There's no way that that AI is going to be trained to access accurate information or to compare information with other sources unless you're actually actively participating in that. So I think that that's important for all of us as project proponents, but also for people who have decided that they like a project, that it's been operating well, for them to do that same kind of search online to see what's happening with AI and because they are political platforms, so they can become that. Where you battle between different sources, right? But AI sources will hopefully, or programs will hopefully learn to kind of get information and winnow out what's incorrect. But there's other sources that are valuable for people aside from AI, and I hope that people don't just the number of students I used to work with recently who just use AI in their papers and stuff without actually doing any thoughtful analysis. It's a bit depressing, but there's other sources out there, including regulatory bodies, and we have to start to learn to trust to some extent the industries that are doing these projects, because the technical people who are involved with those projects are good at it, and they can tell you what the risks are, and they'll be honest about what the risks are in projects. They're not just going to whitewash something, right? So sources sometimes have to be the actual companies that are doing the work, and we have to learn to trust them on some levels. So
absolutely. Jillian, any thoughts?
I'll maybe from an organizational perspective, we do put a lot of work into preparing our organization for misinformation or disinformation or fake news, whatever term you'd like. But for us, we spend a lot of time understanding where might we be vulnerable, where have there been significant announcements or media articles that have had sort of an uproar, understanding the public environment, right? So each community is different. We've had some counties that love what we do, love us, love CCUS, and some that are very concerned about direct air capture or other forms of CCS that we don't participate in, but that impacts still that public perception. And we spend that time then developing our own messages on, I don't know if countering misinformation is correct, but developing those messages to respond to that misinformation, but also really preparing staff. How do you engage with somebody who is angry about this? Who doesn't believe in what you're saying? When do you stop the engagement? Like, when does your own safety start to really matter in these circumstances? And then being as transparent as we can when we go out to communities in these different conversations, and sharing information in really timely ways, versus waiting for something to happen and then trying to respond. So I would say there is effort, and we put effort in to dispelling some of this misinformation, especially when we're heading into communities.
Kyle, I'll get you to answer as well. Get your thoughts on this.
Sure. So, yeah, I think about putting in effort to dispel it, like on a broad brush. I don't think that's something I'd be putting a whole lot of effort in. It's very much for me focused on your communities and the people that you're trying to engage with. So, I heard from colleagues, some of your best conversations are the ones where you just drive up to their ranch and you're talking to them without any prior information, because when you send them an informational pamphlet or a mailing, what do people do with it? They look at it, and if they're interested, they're going on the internet, and who knows what they're finding, right? But when you can get face to face with the person and just have those conversations, I mean, that's really when you're making the best headway. I will say though, one of the things that we'll do before we go to events is we will do a little bit of searching on the internet ourselves and say, okay, what are people pulling up? Let's type in some keywords. So there's a CO2 pipeline website and they're all against pipelines. So what are they saying? What are people who are anti-climate change saying? I'm not looking to argue about climate change with people. I'm just, the markets are driving companies to do CCS for whatever their financial reasons or their, whatever their company stakeholders are saying they should be doing. So I don't want to get into that game. I prefer to focus on the science. How can I reassure the communities? I'm not looking to justify like, hey, we need to be green this or that. I'm just focus on the facts of the point. And so, you know, a little bit of pre-screening before I go to events, like, okay, what are these message boards saying? So I'm prepared with what kind of arguments that might come to me with. Some of them are definitely large logical arguments, and you have to be prepared for, you know, what is specific to your project, because you can't just paint a broad brush on all of this. Like, what works for my site is going to be different than Norm's site, than Jillian's site. You know, we each have to look at our individual communities and what's working for us. So.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kyle. Well, we have reached the top of the hour here. So I'll just remind everyone that this webinar is the third in our 5-part series. So see our full webinar schedule at the albertacarbonhub.com. Part 4 will be on changing jobs, leveraging your skills and knowledge in Alberta's CCUS sector. And that will be on Tuesday, December 10th at 11 a.m. So we hope to see you back here for that event. I'll ask Kaylin if she can just launch our closing survey, and we'll just ask everyone if you could just give us another moment of your time to answer these questions for us. That would be helpful. We'd like you to tell us how the overall quality of the webinar content was today on a scale from very good to poor. If you can make a selection there. Our second question, how valuable was the information presented in the webinar and the discussion we had today? Anywhere from not at all valuable to extremely valuable. Please go ahead and make a selection there. And we just have 2 other questions. Would you consider a career transition into the CCUS industry based on what you learned? Yes, no, maybe, or maybe you already work in the industry. And lastly, would you like to learn more? And if you could just submit your survey questions to us, we'd be most grateful for your input. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Today's webinar was supported by the province of Alberta and working in partnership with the Government of Canada to provide employment support programs and services. So thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, Norm, Kyle, and Jillian, for your insights. We very much appreciated the discussion we had with you today, and I think you provided some excellent information to our attendees. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.